Hi everyone, happy Earth Day. Thank you for tuning in to our Sustainable Agriculture event. My name is Becky Ryan. I am the Regional Field Director for the Climate Action Team in Richmond with the Virginia League of Conservation Voters. And also with us today, we have Colin Arnold, Field Organizer for Hampton Roads with the Climate Action Team. And we are here to talk to you about sustainable agriculture. So to start it off, we'll run through the agenda real quick. We will introduce our topic, talk about why sustainability is important in the agricultural sphere. We have two special tours for you from the Shepherds in Virginia Beach and Hickory Hill Farm in Ivor, Virginia, talking about what practices they're using on their farms. We will then talk about a couple of other pieces to aim towards sustainability with farms, share some resources for you if you'd like to learn more, and then talk about some of the federal policies that we can encourage Congress to do in order to promote these practices and help our farmers. So why agriculture? Why are we talking about this today? Because agriculture is still Virginia's #1 private industry. It accounts for more than $70 billion annually and 334,000 jobs across the Commonwealth. Virginia ranks #6 in terms of apple production, #8 for grapes, #9 for peanuts, and #10 for tomatoes. So those are four crops that Virginia ranks in the top 10 across the country. So it's very important to our economy and the livelihoods of more than 334,000 people. So what are we talking about with sustainable agriculture? What do we mean? That is efforts that avoid harming the environment, provide fair treatment of the farm and the workers, and also support and sustain local communities. Industrial crop production, that's more monocropping, like one crop on the whole farm. It also involves application of fertilizers and a heavy use of pesticides, whereas sustainable crop production relies more on inputs that enhance the environment, the communities, and the welfare of workers. And the benefits of sustainable agriculture, as you can see on the screen: better quality of life, addressing food insecurity, especially for local areas, higher yields and increased profitability, less need for those expensive and environmentally damaging additions like pesticides and fertilizers, and also soil and water conservation. One of the key issues that we have with the Chesapeake Bay restoration is nitrogen pollution, and that comes from fertilizers that we're using on our crops across the watershed. So in Virginia, all the way up to Pennsylvania. And so by increasing efforts towards sustainability, we can not only help that farm itself and that local ecosystem, that local environment, but have far-reaching consequences across the entire region. So I'm going to pass it over to Colin now.
Yeah, hi, I'm Colin. Like Becky introduced, I am a field organizer here in Hampton Roads, and I am proud to introduce you to two Virginia farms that were kind enough to work with us and talk about what they're doing already for sustainable agriculture. First, I want to introduce you to the Shepherds at What the Farm. They were kind enough to send me some video clips and some pictures and some copy, and I helped them put together a video, which we are now going to play.
To farming probably started somewhere between my granddaddy's strawberry patch and my aunt's piglets. As a young mother,
I'm also going to play the correct video. Sorry about that. What the Farm is a family-owned farm in Virginia Beach, right near the Back Bay. "5 years ago, Kelly Shepard says she never would have thought her family would be farming in rural Virginia, or raising their kids to do so as well. And yet, here they are. The Shepherds are a military family, and while stationed in Australia, they saw farming practices there with fresher produce, healthier animals, and greener pastures. Her husband, Chris, pushed to start their farm in 2018 with regenerative practices that would keep the soil healthy. The Shepherd family achieves this by using 3 different kinds of livestock: sheep, chickens, and pigs, and rotating them between small sections of their total farm. First, the sheep graze over a plot, eating a diverse variety of grass and vegetation and fertilizing at the same time. This is called mob stocking. This way, the sheep have plenty of room to move around, but they're in a small enough area that they can't just wander and eat all the sweet grass that they want. They have to go for the more nutritious plants too. Mob stocking also means that all of the animals are a little easier to keep track of and better protected from predators. Before they eat too much, the sheep are moved to a different plot. And after a few days, the chickens are rotated in so that they can start eating the bugs attracted by all that sheep poop. And yes, these shepherds do not shy away from calling it that. They keep their chickens in big mobile tractors so that way they can move them to fresh grass every day. And this helps the pasture regenerate. That way the chickens can be outside, but still be protected from elements and other dangers. The chickens add in more fertilizer, and then they're rotated to follow the sheep as they graze other plots. Then come in the pigs, which the family call natural tillers. And also they named each one of them Kevin Bacon, too. As the pigs root around for food, they dig up the soil and stomp it back down again. This mixes all that manure back into the earth and aerates everything, too. Then the plot is left alone for a while so the vegetation can keep growing and regenerate a bit. All of this keeps the land healthier. The grass never gets eaten down to nothing, so there's no worry about erosion or needing cover crops. And the more the grass grows, the more CO2 it takes out of the air and puts back into its roots in the soil. This process is called carbon sequestration. And for the animals, they get a diverse and nutritious diet, whether it's the sheep and the pigs eating all these different kinds of grasses and plants the pasture can support, or chickens eating all the native bugs that thrive in such a varied ecosystem. And since the livestock is never in one spot for too long, there's never a big buildup of waste in any one place, and that keeps everything healthier. What the Farm's mission is simple: serve the soil, serve the animals, and serve the community. On their website, www.whatthefarmlife.com, you can read more about how they farm and how to make better use of produce and meat with recipes and pantry tips. In the future, they plan on expanding the educational aspects of the farm to help teach other potential farmers and homesteaders everything that they've learned. You can also support them directly right now by ordering off their website or checking their schedule to see what local farmers markets they're going to be at. I, for one, am excited to get a chance to try some of their poultry, and I'm also excited to see what I can learn from them, because it's farmers like the shepherds at What the Farm who can teach us and help us pave the way to food systems that are more sustainable and create a greener earth. All right, and that is the end of the video. So and that was, again, that is What the Farm. You can check them out at whatthefarmlife.com. And, you know, they frequent the Hampton Boulevard Farmers Market and the Harvest Market at O'Connor Brewing in Norfolk, and they have their full schedule for when they appear there on their website, and a lot of great recipes and explanations about a lot of these practices. So I highly recommend that you go there. And then the second farm we're going to be touring is going to be Hickory Hill Farm, which is out in Ivor, Virginia. They are doing some similar multi-livestock rotations, and Hickory Hill Farm and one of their farmers, Becky Key, was kind enough to put a video together for us, and I will just go ahead and let her speak for herself.
I've always been fascinated by growing things. Our journey to farming probably started somewhere between my granddaddy's strawberry patch and my aunt's piglets. As a young mother, I became aware of the industrial food system, and I wanted something more, something better for our family. We started with a few backyard chickens in a suburban neighborhood, but the more we learned, the more we saw in regenerative agriculture a way of life where our family could thrive while we give back. Now, my husband and 4 children and I are the caretakers of 22 acres of pasture and woodland. Here's some of the projects we're working on. We began with a flock of laying hens since we already had experience with chickens. The birds are both pets and livestock to us. Those first chicks were raised in our living room. And since we know how important it is for them to have fresh greens, grits, and even soil, we brought those things into them regularly until they were big enough to move outside. With thoughtful design, we built a shelter on wheels that houses everything they need while moving them daily to fresh ground. This spreads out their manure naturally in small doses that the pasture can easily digest, and it gives us beautifully clean eggs with deep orange yolks. The chickens roam throughout our farm. They eat bugs, grasses, weeds, rodents, grubs, kitchen scraps, and a non-GMO layer feed that we source locally. They help us with clearing ground for garden beds, they turn compost, and they clear underbrush in thick overgrown areas. They are a pasture sanitization program. They come behind the sheep and turn used bedding into rich compost. In the spring and summer, a hen will occasionally brood her own clutch of eggs, and we get the joy of baby chicks. We also get a lesson in how to raise them naturally. A big part of regenerative farming is the carbon cycle. While chickens do eat grasses and weeds, they don't mow a grassland the way herbivores do. At Hickory Hill, our herbivores are a flock of hair sheep. We started with 30 ewes and a ram from a local farmer, and almost all of them have given birth since we got them in July. We also have a couple of goats in with the sheep. Their primary job on the farm is mowing and brush control. This is where the carbon sequestration magic really happens. Every time the sheep come through an area, they bite off the grasses and weeds and eat the leaves of the brambles and the lower branches of trees. They turn that grass into meat for us, which is tasty and healthy, but they are also participating in a carbon cycle that actually pulls carbon out of the atmosphere and traps it in the earth. Grasses use carbon dioxide and sunlight to grow. When the sheep take a bite, it stimulates new, thicker growth and a natural pruning of the roots. Some of that carbon comes right back out of the sheep in the form of manure, which is deposited on the ground, where it is digested by everything from pill bugs to worms to microbes and literally builds the soil. On our farm, we use solar-powered portable electric fencing to move the sheep to a new paddock every day. This keeps them on fresh pasture and encourages them to eat everything. Weeds are controlled, the pasture is fertilized, and the sheep leave their manure and any parasites behind as they move on to a fresh spot tomorrow. We also raise chickens for meat seasonally at Hickory Hill. Their south-facing houses take full advantage of the sun to warm them. We use heat lamps inside a box, which takes less electricity. They run under it to warm up and back out for food and water. Nipple waterers mean clean water for chicks and no water wasted from chicken poop. When they're old enough and the weather is right, they move into a floorless shelter, a chicken tractor that also has wheels. Every morning and evening, we move that tractor over one spot, which gives them a fresh bed of grass. Their door is open during the day, and they roam far and wide, eating grasses, clovers, and bugs before heading back home to the feeders. These chickens get sunshine, exercise, and an endless salad bar and plenty of attention during their lives. When they reach full size, we harvest them here on the farm. The waste from chicken butchering is not waste at all and becomes compost, which feeds our garden. We're constantly learning and striving to contribute to the health of the earth and our community. We don't use pesticides. Our guineas eat ticks, bugs, and seeds and don't require us to buy grain. We don't use herbicides. We use our sheep to eat the weeds. We don't buy fertilizer. Our animals provide that for us. We will continue to look for ways to mimic nature and participate in the renewal of the land that we steward. And we invite you to participate too.
All right, and that is Hickory Hill Farm. So I hope everybody loved getting a little tour of 2 Virginia area farms. And let me get back to the presentation. Both Hickory Hill and What the Farm would love to have people out to tour the farms if you feel comfortable. Big wide space, get to know some sheep and chickens and pigs and cows and what have you. And I believe both in the future are planning on doing education for other people who want to start similar farms or just want to know about sustainable agriculture. So, check out Hickory Hill at hickoryhill.farm. Check out What the Farm at whatthefarmlife.com, and follow them on social media. They're they're a couple of great groups of people. So let's talk a little bit more about some some other sustainable agricultural processes other than the kind of big ones that the farms covered with livestock rotation and mob stocking. One of the big ones is cover crops. So I grew up in Central Virginia in a little housing community that literally had 2 big dairy cattle farms in it. And I distinctly remember one of them grew some extra grain on their property to help with feed during the winter. And so, the wheat would, grow for a good portion of the year, but when it wasn't growing, they would seed it with clover. And that's called using a cover crop. It's an extension of what we kind of think of with crop rotation, which I'm sure everybody learns about with the agricultural revolution in grade school, which is the idea that, well, if you grow grain or corn on a plot of land for too long, it takes all the nutrients out of the soil, and then you have to let it rest for a while. And a lot of times you would grow things like beans in there to help get nutrients back into that soil. And cover crops are just an extension to that, where it's not just, all right, we're going to let this field rest for a year. It's thinking about when we're not using that field for the crop that we're primarily growing it on. So there's a couple of really, really big reasons to do this. The biggest thing is erosion. If you don't have a crop actively in the field, if you don't have plants in that field, it's not protected by leaves and root systems. So it is incredibly susceptible to wind and rain washing all of that dirt away. And it's susceptible to just the heat from the sun drying the dirt out and killing a lot of the microbiome and insects and natural like fungi that kind of live in the soil and keep it healthy. So the big thing is, if you have a crop that runs from April until August, well, you have to keep other plants in that field the rest of the year so that the rest of the year's weather doesn't just completely destroy the soil. because and that could be anything from greens to clover to planting other crops to be in that field in the meantime, or just letting grasses overtake it for the winter, because those roots will help hold that soil in place, and the leaves will protect the kind of like blunt force of the rain coming down, as well as use a lot of that liquid and water and keep it in that field. Another big thing is nutrients. If when that water leaves that field, if there's nothing to use it, it's also going to take nutrients out of it. So if you have any leftover fertilizers, or if there, any manure or any, carbon left over from dead harvested crops, that's going to make its way into waterways. And like Becky said earlier, that's a huge part of pollution in the Chesapeake Bay. It's a really big thing that we have to worry about. And one way that you can take care of that is with by planting leafy greens. Especially if by happenstance a field has become over fertilized just by your natural ways of doing it, of working crops back into the soil, that kind of thing. Or if there was a particularly bad year where the plants just couldn't perform as well and couldn't take as much nutrients out of the soil, you can end up in a situation where you've basically have an all-you-can-eat buffet for your plants, and instead of growing all of the the things that you want them to grow, like tomatoes or grain or seeds or what have you, instead they just eat all of that and their leaves get really, really big, and that's basically all that they grow. And so a way to help scavenge that nitrogen out of over-fertilized soil is actually just with leafy greens, with planting, field greens like mustard or rocket, or even, grasses, or, heads of cabbage, if you want to do that. I'm not an expert on farming, so I don't know how you would effectively work that rotation in. But as far as cover crops, really easy to plant greens, help scavenge some of that nitrogen, and then mow them down and plant the crop that you planned on planting. And then, like I said earlier, legumes are a way to get nitrogen back into that soil. If you've been planting a lot of like really nutrient heavy crops, tomatoes and peppers eat a lot of nutrients out of the soil, and using legumes, which do include beans and peas, but also include red and crimson clover as well. They encourage certain kinds of bacteria to live in their roots, which take nitrogen out of the air and then fix it back into the soil where plants can use it better. Again, when you're doing this and you're having, lots of plants, and they're putting into the root systems and they're keeping the soil, and it's going to be less likely to then erode into waterways as well. And the last reason to use cover crops is they're good at, weed and pest prevention. Especially if you let some of those cover crops go to flower, you'll attract a lot of pollinators. You'll attract a diverse ecosystem of different insects, which will help deal with pest insects and problem insects. I know the first thing that when I started gardening, the thing I was told is like, hey, these are plants that will attract ladybugs. You want to do that because aphids will eat everything that you put in the ground. It also stops really invasive plants like weeds from taking over, a field. I did mention that, sometimes it is okay to just kind of like let, natural kind of pasture grass take a field over as a cover crop, but that can also be more difficult to kind of control and kill off once you're ready to put, the crop that you want to grow in the ground. So being particular about the kinds of cover crops that you use means that you have a little bit more control, and you can move flexibly from one plant to the other. And then the other thing I want to talk about is no-till farming. No-till farming, I don't necessarily want to call it new, but it is starting to get more of a groundswell. For those who don't know, tilling is just when you plow the land. Back in when you had just a single plow tied to a horse or an ox, or nowadays where you have a big tilling implement that you drag with a tractor. has been kind of the traditional go-to way of farming since the 18th century and the agricultural revolution, and that's because it means a farmer can plant a lot more crops in a much faster time, which is pretty integral to the way that our society and our food systems currently work. However, it's incredibly destructive to the soil. And thankfully, no-till methods have, caught up to tilling. And with new implements for tractors and new strategies for planting, not only can you create fields that have higher yields with no-till, but also you can use it takes up to half as much labor to actually do the planting, since you're passing over the field less times. You don't have to plow and then plant. You can just plant, and also there's less strain on tractors. You don't need as much torque, and so it actually can be up to 80% more fuel efficient to do no-till planting as opposed to till planting. So a couple of the big reasons to do no-till is, one, it helps keep the structure of that soil. A big problem when you till soil is you till it and then you pretty much plant it immediately, but it takes time for those plants to grow and take root in that soil to protect it. So you might be doing a really good job of tilling, of mixing old plant matter and root systems and manure and existing carbon in the soil together to make a good healthy soil, but without the structure of a living root system, it's just going to be incredibly susceptible to rain and wind. And it also kind of destroys that top layer of the soil that's kind of a protective mulch that helps with stop evaporation, helps stop erosion, helps stop weeds and pests getting into the soil, that kind of thing. The other big thing is no-till helps preserve the microbiome of the soil. When you go and till the land, it tosses a lot of the land up, and again makes it susceptible to heat and evaporation, which kills off like a lot of those bacteria and fungi that naturally exist in the soil. And especially are things that you try to attract with legumes to help nitrogen fix. And if you keep doing tilled soil over and over again, it speeds up that process of getting to land that doesn't have any nutrients, that's kind of lifeless, and then you have to go through a restorative process of planting, a crop that you may not even really be using all that much, in order to get it back to a healthy state to start growing the plants that you need to grow. And an important thing is also, we shouldn't think of cover cropping or no-till farming or mob stocking as one tool that you use for a farm. They are interchangeable. You can, or not, they are interlocking. So, it might be that you can look at all these different sustainable farming tools and say, all right, well, cover cropping and mob stocking really, really fits the strategy and like the effort and time I have for my land and what I need to do with it. Whereas somebody else might say, oh, well, no-till farming and cover cropping, that's the combination that's really going to work for me. And cover crops really work well with no-till farming because it means you are constantly keeping a living vegetation in that soil. It again, you can go through and kind of like mow down to greens or whatever cover crop that you're using to help keep that top protective anti-evaporation layer, and it also keeps all of those all that microbiome healthy and alive deep in the soil, which will actually fix more nitrogen in. It will help decay a lot of that carbon and plant matter that you're continually laying down on top of it, so you don't have to till in extra fertilizer, and it just keeps the soil living and healthy like a natural pasture land is. And the last thing, like I mentioned, is efficiency. Now that we have specific no-till tractor implements, you only have to go over the the field wants to plant, and you have to use a lot less power and therefore a lot less energy, whether or not that's gas powered tractors right now or electric tractors as they become more available in the future. And the other thing is it so much makes the soil health better that you don't need to purchase fertilizers. You when working with an organic cover cropping system, you don't need to purchase herbicides either, which is really important because no-till farming without organic cover crops does require more herbicides than you would with a tilling method to help control that that earth while it's not being used. And again, we really want to make sure that there's always vegetation on that ground to protect it from erosion and keeping not only the extra herbicides but any nutrients that are in the soil from being leached out into waterways. I'll go ahead and cover resources and then hand it back to Becky. You can find more about all of these topics at these pages. The Virginia Cooperative Extension is a great resource for both commercial and professional farmers, as well as homesteaders and home farmers. The Piedmont Environmental Council is a great resource for working farms and improving practices. And then the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education organization, also known as SARE, has based on regional United States, great articles and specific guides for how best to implement sustainable agriculture given the climate and soil types that are in specific areas of the United States. So I will hand it back to Becky.
Thanks, Colin. So the Virginia League of Conservation Voters, we love to talk about policies. And here are some of the things that came out of last year's House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis report on ways to address climate change through agricultural practices. Congressman McEachin out of the Richmond area, his district goes through Petersburg and down to Chesapeake. He sits on that committee and so was a huge part of this report. And the top three here are increasing the carbon sequestration that Colin mentioned, and also resiliency through that climate stewardship. So the ways that Congress can help, we can help them increase their profitability in making their farms more resilient by supporting these efforts to do the no-till practices, cover crops, the rotational grazing, other resource management, and then also next, reducing agricultural emissions, again, through carbon sequestration, and also what Colin mentioned with the no-till farming, cutting down on fuel usage. That means fewer emissions in agriculture. So if we're not tilling up the soil, we aren't releasing so much carbon from the soil. And then by not using the heavy tractors to till, then we can also cut down on that fuel usage. And we can help reduce nearly 10% of the country's emissions from agriculture through some of these practices. And then also supporting renewable energy and energy efficiency on the farm. So Becky talked about how they are using the heat lamps in the box, and it reduces the energy usage. And again, we can cut down on the fuel usage, but also there are some efforts to a pilot program up in Massachusetts, I believe it is, where they're looking at having solar panels above crops like leafy greens that don't need as much sunlight, to see if instead of using just this wide acres of solar panels and that's it, we can use crops with solar panels to again reduce some of that soil erosion, but also promote renewable energy across the region. And then a few other areas that we want to support farmers and create a fair and equitable system with saving farmland. We see multiple benefits from it: reducing emissions from development, retaining opportunities for carbon sequestration, and reducing pressure to put more marginal lands into production with the attendant carbon loss. But in the US, 30 to 40% of food goes uneaten through loss or waste, which increases greenhouse gas emissions as well. So more regional food systems have the potential to reduce transportation and energy usage. If we're not uh, carting our produce hundreds of miles away, then we can certainly reduce the transportation and emissions that way. But we definitely want to prioritize climate stewardship in all communities and help that transition where we can. And I think at the federal level, we have a lot of ways to go about that in protecting our environment, but also supporting our farmers that we rely on for our food. So those are our policy priorities. Uh, Thank you so much to the Shepherds and the Keys for all that they're doing and for helping us out today by taking us on those video tours of their farms. Thank you all for tuning in and listening to our presentation on sustainable agriculture. Please don't hesitate to leave comments on the video if you have any questions. We'd love to try to help you figure out the answers. We are not experts by any means, but we will try to get those answers for you. And for more information on our upcoming events, for the remainder of our Earth Day celebrations, for actions that you can take to support our efforts, please go to our Mobilize page, mobilize.us/LCVVA. And thank you again so much for watching.